Okay, welcome to Waiheke Media Teacher. This is the live stream for Gear 10, mostly 10S pretty much. And we're going to be talking tonight about the essay question in the upcoming exam on this book that we read earlier in the year, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Alexie. By Sherman Alexie. And I'm going to be I'm going to go over, I'm going to go through some slides I've got on how to kind of tackle the question, and then also what kind of questions you could expect to see on Thursday or Friday. So here we go. I'm going to bring up these slides, and we'll get a start. Like I said, you can make sure you bring the book home if you need to the other day. But I've also got some resources for you that I've put in the description to one of a great website I think that does really well with these kind of things, Schmoop. And I've also going to put a link to this presentation up there. Oh, hey Eric. So. That's what we need. We need this. Okay, so here we go. That's me up there, down there, and I've kind of changed my direction, so I'm pointing down here. Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian is a novel by an American Indian writer, Sherman Alexie, that we've read in class. And it's about this interesting character, as you might remember, a budding cartoonist who growing up on the Spokane Indian reservation, and his name is... God, now I'm blanking out on his name. You guys probably remember his name. What is his name? Oh, Arnold Spirit. That's right. Yeah, there we go. Arnold Spirit. And some of his mates, Rowdy, etc. And he's kind of a story about him transitioning between these two worlds. One world on the Indian reservation, and another world where he goes to the sort of white middle class school in another town. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that, and we're gonna talk about how you can nail this exam question. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the structure of the questions. Now there's two parts to the question, and you've got to make sure that you kind of attack both parts in your answer. The first thing is, if you follow along, you'll practically see the questions, okay? Patience. The first thing is you've got to describe, and the second thing you've got to do is explain. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what those two things mean a little bit later on. And you need to kind of make sure that you're writing a structured essay. And what that means is that it's an essay that's got a beginning. Let me go back there, which is essentially an introduction, a middle, which is maybe one or two body paragraphs, and an ending, some kind of conclusion that wraps it all up. So it's a structured essay, okay? And that means creating paragraphs, leaving spaces between the paragraphs, and having a little bit of organization. So I have a beginning where I'm going to introduce what I'm talking about. Often that means repeating the question. You're going to have a middle, which is kind of the guts of it all, the body paragraphs, and then you're going to have a bit at the end. Now, there's three types of question there's three questions that are offered to you, and there's three types of questions in both the one about the novel and the one about the film, but we're pretty much just focusing on the novel tonight. So the three types of question are: there's a question about the characters, there's a question about some key ideas in the book, and there's a question about how the settings impact how you think about the book. And you pick one of the three things to talk about. So if you feel like I know a lot about the characters on the chat, if I'm still going here. Let me just check him. Am I still on? Oh, my OBS looks like it might have crapped out. Okay, no, we're good. So I'll go back to where we were. So there's three types of questions. one on characters, one on key ideas, and one on settings, and you pick one. Okay, so characters. Let's have a look at what characters is about. So characters is often a question not only talking about a single character, but talking about the relationships between characters. So it's often good to have a kind of a notion of a couple of characters and how they interact. And then so if you're talking about two characters in a novel, you might often also be talking about the idea of a conflict between the two. And in this book, we have kind of two significant. We have quite a few characters, but there's two significant ones. There's Arnold, and there's also Rowdy. And if we think about those two characters, there does end up being a conflict between the two of them. So, am I still on? Someone says I'm not on. Let me check. Hold on. Let me know if I'm on. Am I on? My OBS seems to be suggesting that there's some kind of problem. I don't know. I think I'm still on. So if you're talking about character, if you're going to do the character question, try and think about at least 2 or 3 characters. Yeah, thanks for the trolling. The next question is about key ideas in the book, and we also refer to this sometimes as the theme. So for this one, you're thinking about what kind of insight did the book give you on how other people live or experience the world. Okay, now this one's kind of easy because the book, takes place in a very alien kind of setting to us. It's in America. It's on an Indian reservation. It's in Washington State. So there's certain things about this it does give us certain insight into how Indian Americans live, and there might be some themes in there that we could have that give us some insight into how other people experience the world. So there's a bunch of key ideas. We might talk about what some of those are a little bit later. The last question that you have a choice in is to talk about the settings. So was there anything specific about the setting? And remember, the setting is the time or the place, or time and the place that the story took place in, and that helped you understand something about a key idea or theme. Okay, and in this book, the setting is quite unique. It takes place, like I said, in partially on Indian reservation. A lot of it takes place in a school in a white middle-class neighborhood. So I think either of those things would work for this book. So I would be thinking about those things and saying, which one do I kind of know the most about? Which one am I most comfortable writing about? And then pick that one. Okay. Oh, I've gone off my I sort of lost my slides for you a bit there. So there's the 3 things: characters, key ideas, and settings. There's a question about character, a question about key ideas, and a question about setting, and you pick one of them. Okay, so what about a strategy for how you might attack this? Now, this is something I haven't really talked about before, but it's a real easy kind of a little thing to think of, particularly about these kind of questions. This is a similar question that shows up in NCA exams, and it goes like this: describe, explain, and then generalize. Okay, so that's all you have to remember: describe, explain, and generalize. And if we look at some of the questions, you'll see how the questions sort of ask you to describe something and then explain it. And I've added this third one in to generalize. Now, how does this look in reality with these 3 questions? Describe, explain, and generalize. Okay, so I'm going to apply this kind of formula to each of the possible questions. So if there's a question about character, there's a character question. You're going to describe the character's physical traits, which are things like how old are they, what do they look like, how do they dress, any other kind of personality, sort of unique personality traits that they have. So if I remember correctly, that we had Arnold has like really bad teeth. He has these crazy glasses. His head is like overly large, etc. And his personality is quite, he's fairly outgoing. He's a little bit, sort of, he kind of has a little bit of desire to do something a little bit bigger than perhaps what the reservation is used to. So you're describing how this person looks and acts, and we want you to use adjectives to explain that. So, is he quirky? How is he? What is his? Is his head? His head's actually huge or ginormous. So use some of that language to describe how he looks. So the next part of the formula is to explain. So what we're talking about here is why is this character central to the text? Why are they a character that's worth writing about? You don't really want to, unless it's something quite significant, write about a minor character. You want to try and write about a major character. So why is this character important? So you've described them. You explain why it is that they're important to the text. And they may be the main protagonist. They may be the reason that the protagonist makes some behavior. They may be the bad guy. Maybe they're the good guy. Maybe they're kind of the moral conscience of the story. So explain why they're essential. Why are they important? And then the next thing you want to do is to kind of generalize a little bit and say, well, what is it that the author is trying to say about people through this character? He's trying to sort of get some message about human beings in general, and what is it that he's trying to say? And so if you can think about those three things when you're attacking this question or any of the questions, I think that's a great way to sort of structure a paragraph or to structure your thoughts, to describe, to explain, and to generalize. So I'm going to go through another one, how this might apply to the idea of a key idea. Well, I'm talking to actually Kai has said, well, how do you talk about two characters? Then you do Kai, and that's a great question. I mean, one of the things that you can do is if I kind of play a little bit of a numbers game when I'm thinking about these questions, and I like to think about it. Say at this level, I'd be thinking, okay, I want an introduction, I want at least 2 body paragraphs, and then I want a conclusion. So if I've got 2 characters, I could actually go. I'm going to go back to the character part. If I had 2 characters, I might describe one character in one paragraph, which would be, maybe Rowdy, and then I could use another paragraph to describe Arnold's spirit, and then I might even actually talk about how those 2 characters interact, and then be done. So you sort of think about, if I've got a couple of key ideas, am I going to talk about 2 different characters, and they have one paragraph for one paragraph for another? Or am I going to talk about some specific characteristics of that character in one paragraph, and then some other characteristics in another paragraph? So sort of be thinking in your head, how can I get some kind of logical structure? Because that is one of the criteria of the question, is to create an essay that has a structure to it. So I'm going to flick over to applying this describe, explain, and generalize to the notion of a key idea. So that's a different question, but it's one. So how do I do this one? Well, I need to know what a key idea is, and then I need to describe what that is in the text, like how it comes across in the text. I need to explain how does it contribute to the overall story of the text, right? So if I'm talking about a key idea in the text being how Arnold is kind of alienated from his Indian friends and society as he moves into the white world of Waiheke High School. So I've kind of identified one of my key ideas may be racism. That's a better idea. So I'm going to identify and describe a key idea. So I've started talking about how Arnold experiences racism in different ways. And then I'm going to explain how this contributes to the overall story. So that would be, it contributes to the overall story because when he moves into Waiheke, he experiences racism. And then when he moves back into his Indian society as well, he almost then experiences a kind of a reverse racism, like he's been changed by the thing. And so the whole story is kind of wrapped around this idea of race. So I've identified it, I've described it a bit, now I'm explaining it. And now can I make a generalization? And for something about the key idea, I could be thinking of how is it relevant today? How is the idea of race something that's relevant to today's readers and people who are reading this book and thinking about their own experience, right? I could be thinking of Maori. I could be thinking about how Maori were forced to go into schools, white schools, where they weren't allowed to speak English. So I'm starting to kind of generalize the idea of racism to a little bit of a wider context. So that's the formula: describe, explain, generalize, apply to the key idea. The last one for us is there will be a question that talks about or asks about the setting. So if you choose this one, how would you would describe, explain, and generalize this one? Okay, so we would be describing the setting. I think something to be sort of knowledgeable about is that the setting can kind of change throughout the course of the book. In this one, I mean, in a really large view, the setting is America. It's the state of Washington, and it's a fairly contemporary story. It takes place sort of in contemporary society. But more particularly, the kind of really relevant setting for it is that it takes place in two places. It takes place in an Indian reservation, and you should know what a reservation is. We did some work on that, and you've had a look at that. You can Google that one. It takes place on an Indian reservation, and then it takes place in a white middle-class town, in a high school in a white middle-class town, right? So it takes place and kind of wavers between these two settings that Arnold moves in between. I think this is actually quite a good one for our book. Explain the effect of the setting on the character. So we've done the describer on the explain. We're explaining the effect of the setting on the character. Well, I mean, it's quite obvious when at one point when he's in his Indian reservation, he's around his own people, but the effect of it is not great for Arnold. He doesn't quite feel as if he fits in that reservation, and he sort of aspires for something greater. And then when he moves to his other setting, of the high school, it affects him as well. He's affected by racism, etc. Generalize. We're going to make a generalization about how the author has described this setting effectively to help us understand important things about the characters, the plot, the theme, or the author's purpose. I think this is why this is a good one, because it's really the author creating these settings and putting this character in them that helps us understand some of the important themes in the book, and the purpose of the book is to sort of show how this character moving between these two worlds is affected. Okay, so that's kind of sort of about. I wanted to point out a couple of things to you. So that I'll keep that. Have a look at that, and try and do one of those. Like pick one and say, okay, could I sort of write a little bit about each of these ones in preparation for the exam? Okay, I want to show you one more thing, and that is a couple of good sources. Now, there's links for these in the description. This is one of my favorite sites for looking at reviews of literature and doing some analysis of literary texts, and it's called Shmoop. You've probably seen it before. I've put 3 links in Shmoop. One is I think you should review the characters. Now there's some main characters in here. There's Arnold Spirit. There's Rowdy. There's his sister Mary Spirit. Mr. and Mrs. Spirit are his mother and father. There's a couple of people, and there's also the people that he meets when he goes into Wellpennant High School. So I would be reviewing that, have a click through some of those, particularly in light of if you're thinking of doing the character question. So make sure you know some characteristics of some of the main characters, like what do they look like, how do they behave, and this is a great sort of summary of a lot of them. You can click on these headlines, and you'll get an analysis of the characters. For example, some of the strengths witty, artistic, talented, a fighter, hydrocephalic. That was his brain being bloated, I think. So that's quite a good analysis and a little review of the characters on Shmoop. I've put a link for that down below as well. And what else? The second last one was the setting. They've done a little bit of analysis of the setting, and I would be reviewing some of these and looking at what other people say. It takes place in a couple of places, Wellpinit and Reardon. Wellpinit is where the Spokane Indian Reservation is and where Arnold lives with his mother. And so this is a good one if you're thinking of attacking the question on the setting. So yeah, this is a really great if you're going to look at for the setting. And there's the other place, Reardon. That's the name of the I got them wrong before. Wellpinit is where he lives on the reservation, and Reardon is the affluent middle class high school. So you could be looking at that one for notions about the setting, like how does the setting affect how the novel takes place. They've also got some things like quotes in here that are quite good to memorize. So Arnold admits that the place is a, quote, hick town that is filled with farmers, rednecks, and racist cops. That's a great description of the setting from Arnold's perspective. And if you can memorize a few of those things, that's really great as well. If you can weave those into your essay to support your ideas, some quotes. You don't have to weave in explicit quotes. You can just sort of reference elements of the story by sort of talking about them in some detail, but it looks really good if you do have some quotes. See one of my earlier live streets on how to memorize some quotes as well. And finally, the last one, and possibly one of the more important ones, is to kind of get a notion of a predominant theme in the text. Now, this one is good. This one's almost a necessary step to have at least one or two themes that sort of studied well, because almost any of the questions, whether it's specifically a question on key ideas, or even if it's a question on the setting, or if it's a question on the character, you can kind of wrap it in one of the themes. And it's kind of where you look as if you've really engaged with the book and engaged with the novel, if you can sort of talk about one of these themes. So for me, some of the predominant themes are this idea of race. It's like they say, it's a pretty huge deal for the absolute true of a part-time Indian, because Arnold is a guy who is moving between these two kind of races in his in the novel, and that kind of affects a lot of what happens. The other one that's quite a big one that we talked about is the idea of poverty and what poverty really looks like. And there's kind of a great scene at the very early stages of the book where instead of taking Arnold's sick dog to the vet, his father actually just brings out a bullet and takes and kill and sort of puts the dog out of its misery. And it kind of really shows, and actually the writer uses it almost as a metaphor of what it's like to be poor. So that's a good theme, and Shmoop is a great place to kind of get summaries of these themes. They've got quite a few themes in there excuse me, that you could be having a look at for this essay. So I think that'll about do it for me. Have a look at this the presentation. I can see that there's a couple of you guys who are already having a look at it, and then follow some of those links to the Shmoop sites. I think that you don't, I would probably, because we're a BYOD class, I think one of the problems is that you have a lot of notes and a lot of resources that are kind of scattered around of Google Classroom, etc. So one thing that I was thinking about this for you guys earlier, was that one thing that I think you should do is if you are sitting in front of your computer and you're looking through some of the notes, etc., and the resources, have a notebook or some paper in front of you and be taking notes on your notes at the same time. Be writing things down, be sort of, making little, arrows connecting things, and just be kind of writing stuff down. And that will sort of, that kind of activity of also writing it down again and reading it while you're writing it will kind of cement some of that stuff in your head and give you then a consolidated, concise little package of things to review as you get closer to the time. So, and it's kind of the act of writing stuff out as well. It sort of helps to cement things in your brain. And so, I'd be looking through all of the things on that revision document for this novel, and then sort of consolidating it down on paper so that you've done a bit of did a bit of practice, and you've got a few things quite fresh. I wouldn't write out an essay. I would sort of maybe try and, do some of that describe, explain, generalize, kind of make notes around those things for different questions or the question that you think you might be interested in. And then revisit some of those websites on Shmoop and take a few notes off of that by hand. That's probably your best bet at this point. Okay, so unless anyone has any specific questions, I think you might be done on this stream for tonight. I'll give you guys a little bit of a moment to chuck any questions on the chat. But otherwise, let me just see how long we've been going. We've probably been going for pretty long. We've been going for 26 minutes. 10 of you out there. Thanks for everyone for checking in. Really appreciate it. It's the most people I've had watching at any one time. So, who's locked door lull to free gift giveaway? Another stream tomorrow. Maybe Carlos, if we come up with a if you want to drop me in the, this one will pop up again as a sort of, you can watch this again later. And if you got any ideas for what you want to do tomorrow night, then I can probably drop some ideas in the comments and I'll see what we can do. But you guys spend the next half hour doing some study on this actually really cool book. I really enjoyed having a look at this book, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. I know it's been a while since we kind of did it, so it gets a bit fuzzy in there, but have a look at the notes, look at Shmoop, write some stuff down around that describe, explain thing, and I've got to show you guys my final slide, just because you know how I am. I'm going to give you my little ending thing. Good luck upon the exams. Kia kaha.